welcome back to the Halo mini-series, Episode 3, Creating a Sustainable Culture of DEI, featuring Jay Graves, CEO at Pathfinder Business Consultants. My name is Douglas Brown, CEO at Halo Consulting, a certified minority-owned executive search firm based in Chicago. If you're new to this event, Halo hosts monthly virtual roundtable events covering current trends in the HR, tech, and DEI space. Don't forget to check out the Halo series, where we hear from executives in an intimate one-on-one setting, discussing what is keeping them up at night in this ever-changing landscape. If you've enjoyed this content, hit that like and subscribe button and sign up for our monthly Halo newsletter, which summarizes current market trends and recaps past events, and that link can be found in our description. Jay, we're thrilled to have you back for the third and final episode of our series, where we discuss what is keeping you up at night.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge crowd. The crowd gets bigger every time, so I'm flattered. But no, seriously, thanks for having me and allowing me the opportunity to share this message with your audience. And hopefully, now that we're on our third, hopefully they found a lot of value in this and continue to find value and mapping out their own DEI programs.
Absolutely, and we're excited to delve into the third episode. And Jay, before we get started, the Halo team and I would like to extend our best wishes to you and your team and continued success in 2023.
Oh, thank you so much, Douglas, and same to you and your team. Like I've said before, this is a journey, and it takes partners and a network and individuals like you, really bringing this out to audiences. So thank you to your team for everything that you're doing, and kudos for all the hard work that I know goes into these series and everything else that you're doing for the community. So thank you.
Absolutely, Jay. We're happy to have you here. And I'd like to give a big thank you to our returning viewers. In this final episode, we will explore the last 4 steps in the DEI program development process that were introduced in parts 1 and 2. These steps include engage, learning and development, measure, and evolve. In the previous 2 segments, we've discussed the potential disconnect that can arise when organizations devote significant time, resources, and energy to their corporate business strategy while neglecting their people strategy. However, by prioritizing and properly investing in the people strategy, the overall results of the company can be greatly improved. Focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion is a critical aspect to consider. By doing so, you can ensure that your company culture is inclusive and that all team members feel welcomed and supported in their roles. This can foster a sense of belonging and can help unite everyone behind the company's mission. Jay, any context you'd like to add for today's discussion?
Really just for today's discussion, I would say that we've done the hard work behind the scenes. And so for this last piece of the discussion, it's the action. It's how do we take it to the organization, and how do we continue to make sure that we have a sustainable culture of DEI and the program lives and thrives for the lifetime of our organization. So no, you've nailed it. I think if people can just focus on this area and maintain focusing on their people, then they'll continue to see better results.
Absolutely. And our audience has been looking forward to this moment when we can delve into the 4th step, engage. Now that the DEI Steering Committee has been established, and like you said, it's time to really roll up your sleeves and get the work done. So we're ready to engage with the entire organization. Let's move on to this important phase.
Yeah, absolutely. So once we've put our strategy together and we feel like we are prepared to engage the organization, it's important that we be very thoughtful about this step. And so that's something that we go through before we launch to the broader group. And during the process of developing your strategy, one of the things that we do is we come up with a communication plan. And so we want to make sure that we roll out that communication plan that's very thoughtful, intentional, and that we've been very clear on the message that we want to send to our employees. And so, this first bullet, communicate your purpose, importance, strategy and plan to the organization. One of the things we always encourage in this step is, if we've done the survey, hopefully we've done the survey and we've gotten those important results to map into our strategy. But we want to share those results. We want to share what we've done well. What are the areas that we're going to focus on? We're going to communicate our DEI purpose. Why are we even doing this? And that's why we go all the way back to that first exercise of really thinking about why are we doing this? And we kind of synthesize that through a group session with the steering committee. We pull that together so that the organization understands why this is important, what we're going to be doing, what are the gaps that we're looking to fill, what are the strengths that we already have that we want to enhance, and then we map out what the organization is going to be seeing over the coming months. We also want to share our goals, make sure that if there are metrics and things that we're shooting for, whether it's in hiring or development, we want to make sure that we share those goals as part of this communication plan as well. And we want to set the expectations, and this is really, really, really important. We want to make sure that people understand that this is intentional. We will be doing this, and these are the expectations of our DEI steering committee, our leadership teams, but also the expectations of the employees themselves. During this process, we also want to make sure that if we already don't have maybe a couple ERGs, or maybe we even have some grassroots groups that have kind of formed, we want to announce that, as part of this process, we're going to be reaching out to individuals to start to form these employee resource groups. So it's an opportunity to, gauge interest, to see which groups may want to come together. And we also typically want to make sure that we're supporting this through a mentorship program. So we may be announcing that we're going to support individuals in the organization with mentorship programs. And we're also going to map this into performance management. And it's really critical that we do this. It's something that a lot of organizations are nervous to do. But it's critically important that we map this into our business, because going back to that first slide, you're really connecting your business strategy to your people strategy. So you need to look at it the same way that you would have metrics and KPIs and actions in your performance management plans around strategy. You should also have that around your people strategy as well.
And Jay, in terms of the communication plan being crafted and established by the DEI Steering Committee, is that rolled out over the course of 1 week? Is it several weeks? Can you share with our audience what that looks like?
Yeah, really, I like to do it all in one, call it like a town hall, where you can get the entire organization together. We're in this remote environment where we may have some remote employees, and we may have field sales and things like that. So the other thing that I encourage is that we record it so that it's something that's housed, and we can put it on our intranets, or make sure that it's in the hands of the employees who maybe they weren't able to make the meeting, or if they ever want to kind of go back, it's really good to just do it in one succinct communication for your launch. Then you want to make sure that you're sustaining your communication in a regular cadence. And so it's different for different companies. They may have a company newsletter or a company intranet or monthly town halls and things like that. But we, as part of our communication strategy, we want to make sure that they're regularly pulsing this message so that it really starts to embed in that culture, and it's top of mind for everybody in the organization.
Really well said, Jay. Let's move on and discuss ERGs, also known as employee resource groups. Jay, from your perspective, what is the value of setting up ERGs, and how does it positively impact the organization?
ERGs are absolutely critical to a DEI strategy. This is where you're creating a safe place for groups to come together, to share their experiences, to be able to have open discussions. But it's also, I like to say that it's the lifeblood of a DEI program, because these are the individuals and the groups that are they're closest to the issues that are happening to them. And you're going to get a lot of ideas. You're going to get a lot of momentum coming out of these ERGs. They're going to be speaking up. They're going to be engaging with the community, with the organization. They're going to be feeding information back to that DEI steering committee. Typically when I'm working with a client, I'm also attending the ERG meetings, because they go through a similar process for their own building of their governance and their purpose and their own strategy. So it really mirrors almost like what we've gone through in these past few conversations. And so it's really critical that we get these organizations formed. Now, you're not going to launch a whole bunch of ERGs at the same time, maybe, depending on the size of the organization or the size of your population. So sometimes we'll start with, what are the most critical? Say, if our goal is to get, more women in leadership positions, or more underserved populations in particular areas, or things like that, then we may focus on those ERGs first and just gauge the interest of the organization and start to form those. What you're showing here is actually part of a deck that we do when we're launching our ERGs. And the reason why we share this is a lot of times when we think of diversity, we may quickly default to gender and ethnicity, but I like to show that there are other ERGs and other groups out there that we need to think about. And this list is always evolving. We're always, I think when I first started this list, certainly there wasn't, virtual, right? New employees wasn't something. Working parents, wasn't something that was on the list. And so, this is something that constantly will be evolving. But I like to show this to just let the company know that there are multiple groups that we need to make sure that we're forming throughout this process.
And Jay, in terms of ERGs across an organization, can you have too many ERGs, and how many employees is required to start an ERG, and can they be too big?
I don't think that an ERG can be too big. Well, what you do want to have is a steering committee. So you want to make sure that the governance is well structured. But we like to have a lot of voices on ERGs, and I've seen some that are 100 people. I've seen some that are 5 people. Just kind of even just depending on the population. The one thing too about an ERG, it's not just serving that population, it's also attracting allies. So for me personally, the first time that I participated in an ERG myself, it was with a veterans group, and I was on the steering committee for that. But I knew that group intimately, right? So for me, that the purpose of being on that group was to drive, our purpose. But I was also interested in, becoming a strong ally for other groups as well. And so I joined our LGBTQ ERG. I joined our early in career ERG. And so it's also a great place to attract allies. So we want to make sure that these aren't restrictive by any means. I mean, that would be, really anti DEI, right? We want to make sure it's inclusive. And again, that safe place where somebody like myself, if I don't come from a particular group, I can sit there and I can ask questions that, I might feel a little too vulnerable to ask, just out in the public, or I don't really have a resource to go to. This allows me to sit, ask questions, absorb, learn, and really figure out how can I best support this particular community that I don't come from. I may not be able to walk in their shoes, but I can certainly be an ally.
In addition to the usual employee resource groups, Jay, can you provide examples of other successful or impactful ERGs that you have observed within an organization or a community?
Yeah, one that I would say has started to grow over the last couple of years and has been really fun to watch and be a part of is multi-generational. So we have now 4 generations working in our workforce, right? And so sometimes working with organizations, there was this real kind of divide, and it was kind of interesting. I'm a Gen X. Everybody always seems to jump over Gen X. I don't know. We're just kind of here, right? But I started to see, with the baby boomer generation and millennial and now Gen Z, this kind of divide and this wall in communication. And anytime I see that, I think if we could just sit at the table and communicate our intent or our view of the world, and we're also willing to listen, then you can start to break down those walls. And so that's a particular group that's been really exciting to see form over the last couple of years, where you can take the strengths of each group and you can then be really intentional about how do you leverage those strengths across the different groups. What's really fun about that is, we do mentoring programs and we also do reverse mentoring programs. And so a lot of times that leads to a lot of interest in reverse mentoring. So one example that I have there is we formed this multi-generational group, and we had somebody who was at the highest level of this organization, and part of the baby boomer generation, and they were railing on social media and TikTok and all this other stuff. Like, what is all this? It's just such a waste of time and everything else. And you had this earlier in career and maybe even some Gen Z that were in that ERG. And so they started talking about how they absorb information, how it's through these quick snippets of data and information, but they're incredibly well informed. Probably more, they have access to more data than you or I ever would have had, growing up, right? We had to bust open the Britannica, right? A dictionary or whatever to do our research. And so through that process, we actually did a reverse mentoring with one of the early in career individuals who happened to be in marketing and their social media, which was underfunded, underutilized, was not being focused on by the organization, and a huge miss. And that individual started mentoring this CEO. And at the end of the day, he really understood, the power of meeting that particular generational audience the way they like to absorb information. And so they did a town hall, and on that town hall, the CEO was kind of going through his journey of, I thought this way, and I realized I had this massive bias and everything else. And, they increased funding in their social media. They kind of restructured how they looked at their marketing group and everything else. And going back to building results, that really drove financial results for that organization. And they also had fun. The CEO started doing his own TikTok, and it was just an amazing thing to watch. But that's a great example of where sitting at that table where people can have those open conversations can really lead to breaking down walls and then leading to progress.
Really well said, Jay. We're going to move on to this article from SHRM, where more companies are using DE&I as executive compensation metrics. Jay, it seems like there's a lot of fear around DEI from an HR perspective. Can you fill our audience in on kind of the background of this article from SHRM?
Yeah. So there is a lot of fear when it comes to putting your metrics there and out there and connecting that to your compensation. We're so used to having our business metrics, right? You need to grow the company by X% or whatever that KPI might be, and your compensation is tied to that. But when it comes to people, there has been a real fear. And so I like to show this article to individuals who are worried about doing that, to say that this is actually a trend, and the companies that are doing really well and are very intentional and purposeful around their DEI programs have created those KPIs. They've put that in their compensation plans, and they measure it just as hard as they would measure their strategic initiatives, business initiatives. And so this is something that, when I peel back, some of the concerns, it goes back to things like affirmative action. And, okay, well, this isn't an affirmative action program. We're not just filling quotas and doing that. This is really about culture change in your organization. And so more and more leaders are getting comfortable with this, but we still have a ways to go. And what I try to do is get them over that fear. But also show them the reason why you want to be able to do this. You've been maybe successful in your business. Well, that's because you had skin in the game, and you need to make sure that you have skin in the game. And the best way to do that is tying it to your performance management or your compensation.
Well said, Jay. And during the engagement stage, it is crucial for the DEI Steering Committee and executives to actively contribute in order to bring about change. When we think about the communication plan, where do you recommend where do you recommend starting in terms of determining these key points and messaging?
Yeah, so this is just something that we have in our roadmap that we use with companies, and we have a whole section that's dedicated to communication plan. And one of the things that we'll do is we've done the roadmap and we've done all that hard work, right? We've got all of our insights. Is we'll just click down into what are the key points that we want to make when we communicate this to the organization, and that's what you see on the left side. And we'll really just, it's almost like a whiteboard session. We want to make sure we're communicating this. We want to communicate these particular key points through our communication plan. And then to the right of that is our messaging, and that's where we literally start brainstorming. What is that messaging track going to look like? What is the actual message going to be? Almost like a script. But this just keeps things really concise to make sure that when we are rolling out, whether that's at town hall or however we're going to communicate with the organization, that it's well thought out, that we've had an opportunity as a DEI steering committee, me as a consultant, that we have thought through every critical piece that we want to make sure comes across to the organization. You don't want to just put this together, walk on stage or pop on the video and say, hey, we're going to do this, and then kind of pontificate on the importance of the DEI strategy. You want to make sure that people are walking away with 4 or 5 key points as to why we're doing this. And so we take them through this exercise to make sure it's very succinct.
And Jay, in terms of the communication plan as a whole, earlier in our discussion, you mentioned that the communication plan should be addressed in a town hall meeting, the intranet, a company newsletter, etc. Is there one avenue that's better than the others, or is it kind of a combination of all of them?
It's a combination. I look at this almost like marketing, if you will. So you want to use a combination of channels because we all digest information differently. If you're doing a town hall, then with the remote environment that we're in today, a lot of companies are not going to the big arenas or the big um, live events, right, with where you have all your employees sitting there, and they're going to be engaged because you're up there speaking and there's nowhere for them to go. They're held hostage there in the audience. Today, I mean, people are multitasking. They may not come on camera depending on maybe your company rules, and so you may not capture everybody's attention in that. So that's why you want to have a multi-channel way of communicating out to your organization, and also part of what we go through in this communication plan as well is what is that cadence going to be? What are those avenues for communicating to the organization that you currently have? What are some that maybe we need to create within the organization? So there are companies that didn't have an intranet that we worked with a couple of months ago, and they went back and created an intranet, and specific culture and purpose on that page was mapped out. And so that was one form of information. Another was sending videos. Others was in their newsletters and emails. And one of the things that I think is really creative that a client recently did is we've created these almost like 1 or 2 sentence statements around DEI, and they'll just send those out on a regular cadence out through email to all the employees. And so it's just a simple way to keep things top of mind for everybody. But to answer your question, it really should be multi-channel.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that context, Jay. And now that we've covered engage, let's talk about learning and development. Learning and development plays a significant role in providing DEI education to the workforce, starting with a solid foundation. It could be in the form of workshops, videos, tailored specifically to the organizational needs, etc. Jay, where do you recommend organizations begin, and how can they effectively educate their leadership and subsequently the rest of the organization?
Yeah, this is a really critical step, and part of the communication plan will be just to announce that we're going to be doing workshops or learning and development series to make sure that we are educating ourselves, creating those foundations before we launch into, the behavior change piece of culture change, right? So we do start with typically unconscious bias. A lot of organizations will start there. it's a great way to really reflect for ourselves. What are those biases? What are some of those decisions that we might be making that we don't even realize that we have a bias, right? And so that's important. The other piece is, what is DEI, right? So we have a foundational workshop and that we start off with just to have people understand, because there's so much, noise. We talked about, one of the things that keeps me up at night, is your question, right? Is that DEI fatigue. And so there's so much noise in the media and in the community today around diversity that a lot of that gets skewed. So I like to definitely make sure that I walk people through, what is DEI, and how do you get to points of systemic racism or policies and so on and so forth. And then we go into link that to unconscious bias. So that's one entire workshop that we will typically start with, so people understand and they have context to be able to go back to. The best part of that too is being able to self-reflect on our biases. All of us have them. And one of the things that I like to share is my own vulnerability. I'll talk about where I've had a biased lens and what created that biased lens, but then how that led to decisions that I made in the workplace. And so but then how I also corrected that and created a filter and a check to make sure that I'm checking my bias throughout all of those different engagements. And I let people know, some of those stories that I share, they're recent. It's not just, hey, I'm a practitioner of this, and so I've mastered it at some point, right? That it's something that we all continuously work on and evolve from. So that's really key for foundational. The other thing that we want to make sure that we do is that we're very intentional about the groups that we're working with. And so I will typically start with leadership, the different leadership levels, depending on the organization, how their organization is structured. But we want to tackle making sure the leaders are prepared for the conversations that we're going to be having when we have these learning and development sessions with their employees. So we'll start there. We'll start with hiring managers, and a lot of times we'll also talk to the talent group or the recruiting group as well, because as you know, Douglas, with what Halo does, this is a really critical piece, because they're going to be the ones that are interviewing people and bringing new individuals into an organization. And so we want to make sure that we're covering these groups first, and then we'll do the same series with employees.
And Jay, in terms of the learning and development aspect and segmenting it by group, in terms of the leadership, hiring managers, and the talent acquisition team, what type of timeline are you looking at to educate those three groups, and how quickly after is it spread across the rest of the organization?
Spreading it across the organization, I like to do that within the first 60 days. Within the first 30 days, I like to hit those leadership and hiring manager and recruiting teams, because once we announce and once we engage, if you then go dark on the organization, then there's going to be time lost. Their day-to-day activities, everybody's busy. They're going to start thinking about what they're executing on their business. And so we like to make those announcements. A lot of times when we do the announcement, we will have already mapped out dates and times for these different groups to attend the workshops. And so we want to do that primarily within the first 30 days. And then following that 30, once we're done with that group, we want to make sure that we're talking to the organization the following 30 days. So, depending on what every company is different. And so kind of depending on what they have going on, that timeline might be faster, a little bit longer, but I really try to keep it to that first 60 days after we've communicated the strategy to the organization, we've engaged the organization, so that it's fresh on everybody's mind. We've built the foundation, because after that, then we can really get to forming those ERGs and executing our strategy.
Jay, really appreciate you sharing that context with our audience. And now that we have provided education to the executive team, hiring managers, and HR, let's discuss the strategies and techniques you use to create a safe and open communication environment.
Yeah, so this is a general flow, I will say. So if we start at the top left there, one of the first things that I will make sure that we communicate is psychological safety. And so that's really the purpose of these first, kind of 4 steps here. It's making sure that it's a safe place for people to speak up, ask questions. It's understanding that these questions or comments aren't coming from a bad place; they're coming from a place of curiosity. And so, if we have a question, like let's not be offended, let's not be thin-skinned about things, but let's engage in a dialogue and make sure that it is all coming from a good place. If I ask something and maybe it's controversial, or maybe another group could consider it incredibly ignorant, from their perspective, understand that I'm asking that question because I'm seeking to learn. And so don't beat me over the head over that, educate me. And so we want to make sure that we get people feeling very, very, very safe. Also, that there's a no guilt zone, right? Like, so much has been talked about, guilt when when we're talking about DEI, particularly when we're, amongst the white male population. That's a large group that I work with. And, some have said, well, gosh, I feel so, guilty when we're talking about this, or when you're, given a history of, racism in the U.S. And it's like, hey, there's no guilt here. This isn't, throwing stones at any particular group or individual, because again, going back, we've all had our own journeys. Even, white males have had their own journeys, right? But, so we want to make sure, like, things that are said in here, it's not to make anybody feel guilty by any means or point out any particular group. It's there again to just educate so that we can have a foundation and move forward. And so that's really that foundational piece that we like to talk about. Well, we also love for these to be interactive, and so we want to make sure that as we're kicking this off, that we encourage people to speak up. And it's been very, very interesting. When I first started this work, I used to think, gosh, what if people aren't going to engage and they're just staring at me and kind of going through the material, right? And am I going to have to pull conversations out of people? And it has never been that way. It's never been that way. People, they want to talk about their journeys, or they want to talk about their perspectives, or they want to learn. And so these tend to be very, very engaging sessions. To the right of that upper right piece, that's a terrible picture of me, selfie there. My daughter had to teach me how that when you take a selfie, you take it up high. So hopefully she's proud of me there. But this is just an example of a live workshop. It's tough today because we do have remote employees, but ideally, if we can get people together in a room, then you can just increase the engagement. You can make it even more interactive. In this particular group that I was working with here, you can see they're all at different whiteboards that we had around the room, and they're kind of going through and they're talking about their own viewpoints of diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, culture. And so as they're mapping all of that out, what we're really doing with that group, and this was a group of leaders for this organization, is they're going through their own discovery. And so, it is really nice to have these live, but with all of us have had to get sophisticated in remote work, and so we also have ways of engaging the same type of program live remotely with individuals. But love to have them live, but you can also do it remotely and be engaging as well. And then going along this bottom part is really what I was describing. This is the cadence that we like to do, where we call it DEI and B 101. That's really just going into that how did we get to this point, right? What is DEI, and how do we get to this point? What is it that we're trying to solve for? Unconscious bias. And then critically, we like to do sessions on allyship, because we're asking people to join us, to support us, and in this journey. And so this is really how you're going to do it with these foundational classes and workshops.
Thanks for that overview, Jay. And that's a really good segue, because the next slide we're going to touch on are the types of allies. So this slide is especially significant as it outlines the various types of allies within an organization and how each ally can have a positive impact. The first that we're going to start with is sponsor, an ally that puts forward others from marginalized groups, specifically in ways that promotes their expertise and reputations. Jay, what does being a sponsor mean to you, and can you provide an example?
Yeah, sure. So a sponsor, as you said, the definition here, from my view, is somebody who's going to represent you when you don't have an opportunity to be sitting at the table, so to speak. So an example that I have is, you know, I was an executive at a very large organization. So I had the privilege to sit at the table when we were talking about people's careers and where we saw them fitting in the organization. And so you know, in that organization, I was the only person of color that sat at that table. And so I often saw that unconscious bias pop up around those conversations. People were, very favorable around individuals that looked or had similar interests that they had. And so as a sponsor, I really stepped in and I would say, what about this individual? We really skipped over that person, but here's a laundry list of all the wonderful attributes and strengths that they have that they bring to the table. And at the time, we didn't have a DEI program, and really, I didn't even realize that I was a quote unquote sponsor, at the time. But I was doing those type of sponsor activities where I was speaking up for individuals who couldn't be in there, and I just had picked up on the fact, almost subconsciously, that there was a bias happening in that room. And by bringing those conversations to the table, it started to break through those walls, and we started to open up opportunities more to some of the more underserved populations within the organization.
Next, we have Amplifier, an ally that ensures that everyone's voice can be heard and that they're represented. Jay, what does being an amplifier mean to you, and can you share an example?
Yeah, I really like this, when particularly as leaders, and when I'm going through this with leaders, I let them know you have to be really intentional and aware of, your employee base or individuals that you have in a room or in a meeting or so on and so forth, and make sure that first you understand their personality and their behaviors. Some people are quiet and some people may speak up. Some people are processors, but you know if you notice that individuals aren't speaking up, pull them aside, talk to them, make sure, see if it's a personality thing, or if they just feel like, hey, maybe I can't speak up because you know what, nobody in this room looks like me. Maybe I have a bit of a wall built up in my own mind around that. And so, calling out those individuals, making sure that they're heard, making sure that their viewpoints are heard. Hey, you know what, if it is somebody who's a processor or somebody who, maybe they're more introverted in those group settings, that you're taking the time to hear their viewpoints even and represent those viewpoints when you're having these discussions, and that you are amplifying their voice, that you're there to make sure that they're heard, make sure that their viewpoints are understood, and make sure that you're giving them that safe place to be able to speak up.
Well said, Jay. Our third ally is Scholar, an ally that researches and learns about the experiences of marginalized groups of people. Jay, what does being a scholar mean to you, and do you have an example that you could share with our audience?
Yeah, I all of these are very important, but scholars, I really enjoy talking with the scholar type ally. And that's somebody who, they're very inquisitive. They want to learn. They believe in what you're saying about their journey, and they believe, why you have a particular mindset, and they seek to really do their own research, to ask questions, to look at what went into that journey. A lot of times when I'm working with companies, individuals like that will come to me and they'll say, hey, I really enjoyed that section that you did on, how racism kind of manifests itself and turns into policy. And so I went back and I looked at, videos of, the 1960s and the marches and the this, and did you know that, so and so percent of these people were part of this group. And I mean, it's just, they are just diving in, and they're diving into this, to this piece. And what I love about that is they are seeking to better understand so that they can be a better ally. And they know that they may not be able to walk in their shoes, and they know that can't replicate their experiences, but they believe that individual, and so they really take a deep dive and they try their best to really put their mindset in, well, gosh, if I was in this situation and what I'm seeing, in my research and what I'm viewing, I get it. I would feel the same way. So, I'm here to help you. So that's how I see scholars engage with scholars.
We have two last types of allies to cover. The fourth ally is Confidant, an
Mhm.
ally that listens and believes marginalized people's experiences about their struggles. They offer a safe place for expression and support. Um, what does being a confidant mean to you, Jay? And do you have an example you could share?
Yeah, this is that person that, again, very open minded, very empathetic, and there's somebody that uh, you know you can feel safe going to, and maybe they're not from your population, or maybe they're in a dominant population within your organization, and this is somebody that you can go to, that you can speak freely, that you can get their viewpoint of maybe not being a part of underserved population, and you can engage in that back and forth conversation, and you can really really wear your heart on your sleeve with this person. What's great about this dialogue is, you know, as somebody from an underserved population, I can also understand their viewpoint as well. But I can go there. I can vent. I can share frustrations, or I can share information with them, and I know that they're not going to take that and judge me on that. They're going to take that information and they're going to allow me to lean on that shoulder that they're offering, and be that confidant for me.
And finally, the last ally we have is Upstander, an ally that speaks out against discriminatory speech or behavior. Jay, what does being an upstander mean to you? And do you have an example you can share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, this is almost that when you think about allyship, we're all going to be different allies. We all have our own personalities. And so, I reflect back to a time when I was talking with somebody. This is when, right after the George Floyd murder and the protests. And, for me, I'm an action person. So, I went downtown Raleigh and I was a part of some of the marches there. And I was talking to somebody else who was equally as enthusiastic, and I said, hey, there's going to be something going on in another town, next to Raleigh, and you live there. Are you going to be a part of that march? If so, I'd love to see you. Let's grab a coffee and let's go march together. And she said, that's not really my way. She's like, but my way is, I came from government and I have great contacts in the federal government at some of the highest levels. And so I am in leading a writing campaign and a policy campaign and so on and so forth. She's like, you march, I write. And so, that's when I really kind of thought about, this is somebody who's using their power, their privilege, their access to really be that upstander. At its simplest form, though, this is somebody who will stand up for you maybe when you're not in the room. If it's so uncomfortable, you can sit in a room and you hear something, you're like, that is not right. That comment or that joke or whatever, that's not right. In the past, it was so easy to just let that go. But if you have that upstander type ally, they're going to speak up, and they're going to say something, whether that's in the moment or pulling somebody aside, um, depending on the situation, right? But that's somebody who's going to address it head on and say, hey, that comment that you made, that is really coming from a bad place, or at least that's what it sounded like. Let's talk about it because it's not appropriate. And so that's where I see that upstander speaking out for you.
And Jay, thanks for covering the five different types of allies and sharing those examples with our audience. Now that we've covered engage, learning and development, the next stage is measure.
Yeah.
And in the six-step measure, once the DEI Steering Committee has been formed, how often do you and the team decide what metrics to track, and how often do you review and adjust those metrics?
Yeah, so I have this, the DEI steering committee bullet here because that is who has really mapped out what the goals are and what those measurements are going to be. And so we want to make sure that we have a regular cadence of reviewing those metrics. And I say appropriate cadence because when you're talking about behavior change, some of this is going to be they're going to be softer metrics. They're going to be how people feel in the organization, and so you can measure those throughout, say, a year by doing listening sessions after you've launched, maybe small, surveys or things like that. But if you're going to kick off, go from one annual survey to another annual survey, you don't want to wait that long, right? So you want to make sure that you're tracking how, I will say, those touchy feely metrics. How do people feel? But then there are going to be some of those harder metrics. If we want to be intentional about getting individuals into more opportunities in leadership, or we want to have a different population that we're targeting to hire into our organization. Those are harder metrics, right? That you can, very firm metrics that you can look at. And so depending on, I'll use recruiting as an example, depending on your hiring velocity, how many roles you may have throughout the year, then you want to go back and you want to measure that on a more regular basis. And so as part of the process that we take the team through, we look at when would it be appropriate to look at the measurements. But we don't want to lose sight of them either. We don't want to put those measurements out there, go through the year, and then review them and hope that we were successful, or see where we succeeded and fell short, because you can make adjustments to your strategy along the way, and you will make adjustments to your strategy along the way. You're going to hit milestones, you're going to hit some tailwinds and accelerate in some areas, and you're going to hit headwinds in other areas. And so you want to make sure that you're making adjustments and that you're staying on top of your measurements. And that really goes to that identifying the gaps. You do your possible best that you can do in your planning, but things are going to come up. One of the things that I learned in the military, there's kind of this adage that, no plan survives the first contact with the enemy. And, that's, it's about the same. It's about the same here. There's no enemy. If you considered an enemy, it would be whatever those headwinds are, or those challenges are. But you want to make sure that you're adjusting that plan along the way.
In your response, Jay, you mentioned that the employee survey in particular, rolling that out on an annual basis might be too long of a time frame in between each survey. What's your recommendation for rolling out the employee surveys, and is there a specific cadence that organizations should follow?
I do like to do the holistic employee survey every year on an annual cadence, but you need to supplement that throughout that year time frame. And so that's where we'll do like small group listening sessions. If we have ERGs that are established, we'll check in with those ERGs and get a real sense of how we're doing and what our progress is like. If you have other subcommittees that are now taking action, and employee action groups and things like that, the change agents that you've engaged to help bring this forward, that they may not be sitting on the DEI Steering Committee, but they're really the ones that are taking the action of the strategy. You want to have pulse check-ins with those individuals and those groups throughout the year.
Absolutely. Thanks for that context, Jay. And moving on to the next slide, this slide illustrates the LMS platform used by Jay and his team to assess the DEI success of an organization. These measurements may include both hard metrics, such as achieving a certain number of leadership positions by a certain date, and soft metrics like improving the sense of belonging or psychological well-being within the organization. Jay, can you fill in our audience what this slide means to you from your LMS platform?
Yeah, so we want to make sure, and the whole platform is built with structure in mind, and making sure that when we're done with this, we have clarity around what we're doing throughout every step of the process, and that we've mapped it out, and that we can go back to this tool time and time again to make sure that we're following our roadmap. But also it's a living document as well, because as we hit particular milestones, we're going to want to change and create new goals, and we're going to create new milestones, and so on and so forth. But the structure that we built here is just to be very succinct. It's to make sure that we've mapped out those goals. What are the deliverables that we need to have to achieve those goals? And then more importantly, who is going to be the lead? You have to have accountability. So who's going to be the lead for that particular goal? And then measures of success. And again, this goes to, are these going to be hard metrics, or are these going to be more, behavior-based metrics? But one of the things with this planning, the next step that we take is, okay, we know this organization, the people on that steering committee know this organization, and they know the heart and soul of that organization. So what are some of the risks that could come up that could derail some of these particular goals? And what are the things that we can mitigate with those? So for example, if you have a certain goal around hiring, and, we're moving into a recession, your hiring cadence might slow down. So what are the things that we want to do? We were actually talking to somebody a few days ago about this. They're going to be slowing their hiring down, and they were really concerned because they've been making great progress. And so, we put goals on there, around looking at internships. Looking at what are other ways that we can still engage with individuals when you may not have the budget to bring in, an FTE at this point, but your organization still needs help. And there's a population here that can be served, through your internship program. So, let's be really intentional about the internship program. Let's be very targeted. Let's look at HBCUs. Let's look at other ways that we can work with veterans and so on and so forth. So, but this whole process here allows you to make sure that you're not losing sight of those goals, and make sure that they're accountable, and then make sure that you can make the adjustments, and that you've thought about the potential headwinds, and you've thought about a plan to get around those, so that you can get through those challenges a lot easier and maybe faster.
Jay, when we're thinking about risks and mitigation, can you provide an example of how you approached your clients about the work their employee resource groups were doing in the community when operations were disrupted and shifted to remote work during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, that was a big one. That was one that, I don't think anybody saw, right? We knew that COVID was starting, but we all didn't know what the ride was going to be like that we were in for. But as we started to go more towards this remote work setting, from a DEI consultant perspective, we had to really start to think outside the box. Okay, we don't want to slow down on how we're engaging people, even if they're remote. We don't want to slow down how we engage with the community, even though we may be remote. And so, what some of the companies did was, you saw on the list there, the ERG, the remote worker ERG. We created, even like a group, and I started to think like the dynamic of that group might be a little bit different than those in the office. And so, let's form a group around that, and let's use the same structure that we would use for employee resource group. When it came to things like engaging the community, the community leaders and maybe the nonprofits and so on and so forth, they were also pivoting at the same time. And so they were creating opportunities that could be done remotely, to continue to support their causes. And so we stayed very close with that and made sure that, those were still opportunities to engage with our employee base and with the community in this particular example. We didn't want to slow that down. And so we made sure that we stayed close to how the community was changing, how we could evolve our processes as well, from an employee standpoint, so that we didn't have to slow down. We just had to adjust to the new normal that was created through COVID.
Really appreciate you sharing that example with our audience, Jay. All right, now let's cover the seventh and final step in the DEI program development process. The last step is evolve, and it is critical for the executive team to commit to the ongoing process, adaptability, and the continuous improvement at this stage.
That's right. So this is, and I know I exhaust the word constantly, but the journey, right? And so, as you're going through this first part, you've launched, you've reviewed, you've adjusted, you've engaged the organization, you're educated, you've got the conversations going, you're really making that progress, and you have momentum, but you can't just stop there. One of the things that I make sure that I talk to leaders in the organization about is, this isn't just a 6 month or a 1 year thing where you check these boxes and you're done. This is something that, it's a cultural shift, it's a behavioral shift, and it is truly changing the dynamic of the culture within your organization. And so this is going to be a multi-year, ongoing, forever commitment that you're going to make. And so you want to make sure that you're constantly evolving your strategy and your plan to that, because at some point you'll exhaust that launch plan, that year one plan. You'll want to get into year two where you're accelerating. You'll want to get into year three where you're sustaining, so on and so forth. So, you want to make sure that we're constantly reviewing progress that we make on our initiatives. For my clients, some will have a monthly meeting, some we have quarterly meetings, kind of depending on where they're at. And we'll do check-ins. We go back to that document and we just see where we are. What adjustments do we need to make to that document? What milestones have we hit that we need to congratulate ourselves for? Move on. What's the next milestone that we need to add to that list? And so that's really critical in this evolve piece. Ensuring that there's constant feedback loop really goes to that conversation you and I were just having around, keeping a close pulse of the organization, those listening sessions, hearing from our ERG leaders and our ERGs, individuals throughout the organization. We just want to make sure that there's a constant feedback loop so that we can make those adjustments and evolve. And then we want to, that assessment piece, right? Kind of feeds into that. And then we just want to continue to update our roadmap and strategy based on the progress that we've made. So it's a constant nudge forward as we make progress throughout this journey.
That was really well said, Jay, in terms of the last step, evolve. And in your response, you mentioned that the evolve stage is really an ongoing journey, a multi-year commitment for the clients you're working with and or organizations that might be following the 7-step DEI program development process. In the case that they might get behind on a couple of steps or check-ins or annual or biannual surveys, what advice can you give to executives and or the DEI Steering Committee if that is established on how to get back on track and continue to make progress?
Yeah, I mean, I would say don't beat yourself up if you start to slip. However, I try to create a mindset that this is just as important as your business strategy. You wouldn't take your foot off the gas when it comes to executing your sales goal or your product development goal or whatever industry that you might be in. You need to have the same intensity around your people strategy. And so while if we slip, then okay, we slipped. Why? Was it something that we really could not help? There was something that faced the organization that we couldn't help. But that goes back to that mitigation process. Okay, how do we get back on track, and how do we get back on track with whatever you face to slow you down? But I really try to make sure that people understand that you need to have the same intensity around your people strategy that you have around your business strategy. And you and I were in business. We've been in business for a long time. We don't slow down on our business strategy, and we need to have the same intensity when it comes to our people strategy. So, you know, um, I have to say that a lot of the clients that I work with, they stay true to it, and that's part of the great thing about having a consultant is, really largely, I'm there to help guide through the process. I'm there to bring best practices and particularly in that mitigation or creation piece of things, but I'm also an accountability partner. And so if we have that meeting on the calendar and they say, oh, well, we can't do, this monthly meeting, then I'll say, that's okay. But, let's extend the next meeting because, we still have a lot of information that we need to cover and catch up on. Right. And so, or, what could we be doing? And, sometimes they're in more of a growth and maintenance mode. And so they're actively doing what they need to be doing. And that's okay. But I try as accountability partner to say, okay, no problem. Let's get the next meeting on the calendar. Let's make sure that we're not taking our eye off the ball here.
Always trying to improve and make continuous progress. Well said. As we conclude, Jay, you've provided some really valuable insight into the DEI program development process, connecting the business strategy to the people strategy, and highlighting the importance of viewing DEI efforts as a continuous journey and an ongoing commitment rather than a short-term effort. Jay, any final thoughts that you would like to share with our audience?
I think in final thoughts, I would just say that, there's a lot of emotion and fear and around launching or even evolving or moving forward in your DI programs. The individuals that I typically work with and the companies I work with, they may either already have something or they tried something and it maybe didn't go quite right, or they lost momentum in sight, or they don't have anything at all, and employees are asking for it, right? And what I try to do is really just take that fear out of it, and that's why the process that we take is very similar to the same process they're going to take for their business strategy. It's really the same when you're talking about people, and so it's okay to be nervous. It's okay to be nervous of taking that first step in the journey. But if you can just follow this roadmap and you follow this roadmap and you follow the kind of details in the roadmap, then you're going to make significant progress and you're going to make mistakes. But that's okay. One of the things that we really do want to do is make sure that we do have a psychological safety. We want to have humility, and that's something that a lot of times we'll put in our communication and talk track. Is that this is a journey for us. As leaders in the organization, it's a journey for the organization, and it's going to be a journey for our employees as well. We're going to make some mistakes, but know that our intention is very, very pure here and very noble. And so we're going to stick with it because it's incredibly important and it's what we owe our employees and it's what we owe society. And so, I would just leave that, if you haven't taken the step, you know, hopefully this has been really helpful for you and you can follow this step. Um, but just take the step, take the leap, and the amount of joy that you get and that you're going to get out of your employees and the results that you're going to have will come back to you tenfold.
That was really well said, Jay. Thanks for tuning in to part 3 of our Halo mini-series, Creating a Sustainable Culture of DEI. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and sign up for our monthly Halo newsletter, which summarizes current market trends and recaps past events that we have hosted. We are excited to announce our upcoming event on Friday, February 24th from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Central, focused on elevating DEI programs and beyond in 2023. The registration link can be found in the description for both the Halo newsletter and our upcoming virtual events below. And Jay, we sincerely and really appreciate your time and you sharing your experiences and insights on the proven 7-step DEI program development process that you and your team developed. And we look forward to staying connected in the future.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity, Douglas, and thank you so much again for hosting series like these. I can't wait to see the next series, and all of your speakers are amazing. I always take something back, and so I appreciate that what you're doing for the community. And anybody here who's watching this recording, this is a great way to reach out to me. You can use the code here. I'm on LinkedIn. Just look for Jay Graves, and you'll find me on there. I love to hear from the audience. I love to hear what your thoughts are, what your experiences have been. So please, anybody from the audience, feel free to reach out to me. If you're stuck, if you're doing your own journey and you're stuck in something, I'd love to help. So reach out, and I'm happy to help you in your journey.
Thanks again for your time, Jay.